People once believed you weren't respectable unless you endured rituals that made zero sense and even less dignity. And somehow, these were the normal ones. Trust me, you haven't met the real disasters yet. 1. In medieval Europe, a person could apparently boost their social credibility by refusing to wash, because smelling like a compost bin was somehow considered a sign of piety and restraint. So you had nobles walking around marinated in their own personal musk, as if deodorant were a plot by the devil himself. And the absurd part is that people treated this like a badge of honor, rather than a public health crisis. One monk became famous for never bathing, earning a reputation for holiness, while simultaneously proving that everyone else just had extremely forgiving noses. And the whole ritual created an environment where someone's proper reputation depended on how aggressively they could repel insects simply by standing still, making it clear that hygiene wasn't optional. Oh no, hygiene was suspicious, and if anyone actually smelled pleasant, people assumed they were hiding something, because apparently in that era, the only thing worse than sin was citrus-scented skin. 2. In Victorian England, a woman trying to look proper had to pretend she didn't have a functioning digestive system, which meant she couldn't acknowledge hunger, thirst, or the biological fact that humans occasionally produce noises that aren't harp music. So you had people consuming tiny portions of food that would starve a house cat and then delicately fainting all over the furniture because corsets squeezed their organs like overpacked luggage. And society applauded this as elegant self-control instead of the slow-motion medical crisis it clearly was, with some women practicing a ritual of silently excusing themselves for air whenever their bodies tried to remind them they were mammals. The entire system was basically a high-stakes performance where dignity meant pretending not to exist physically, which is impressive in a tragic sort of way, because no one has ever worked harder to be considered respectable while actively fighting their own intestines. 3. In ancient China, the ritual of foot binding was sold as the ultimate way to look proper, which is the polite historical phrasing for permanently rearranging your bones to impress judgmental relatives. And the cultural logic went that tiny feet, preferably shaped like grotesque little lotus petals, proved refinement, even though the process involved intentionally breaking toes, folding them under the sole, and wrapping everything tight enough to make circulation a theoretical concept, leaving women hobbling through life like fashionably injured flamingos. Somehow, this torture routine became a symbol of beauty so entrenched that families showed off bound feet like trophies, never mind the infections, the pain, or the fact that walking required the balance of someone attempting a heist through a laser grid, and the whole thing reveals how far people will go when society tells them suffering isn't just acceptable, it's stylish. 4. In medieval France, there was a ritual where high-ranking men powdered their wigs with clouds of talc thick enough to fumigate a cathedral, because looking proper apparently meant resembling a frosted pastry with aristocratic opinions. And these wigs weren't optional. They were the social equivalent of Wi-Fi access, except instead of buffering, you got lice colonies establishing full-scale republics on your scalp. To maintain the illusion of dignity, servants had to apply the powder with bellows, basically blasting their employers in the face with scented dust until the men achieved the desired ghost who died financially secure aesthetic. And the final irony was that everyone pretended this ritual made them appear sophisticated rather than terminally absurd, proving once again that nothing says status like voluntarily turning your head into a powdered donut full of parasites. 5. In the Georgian era, men participated in a grooming ritual known as mustache training, which sounds like a fun workout for hair until you realize it involved waxing, twisting, combing, and sometimes literally tying the mustache to a contraption that held it in place overnight, all to achieve the perfect upward curl that supposedly signaled honor and discipline. People took this so seriously that some men even slept sitting upright to avoid crushing their precious face decoration, treating their mustache like a sacred houseplant that would wilt if shown disrespect. And the absurd part is that this fussy ritual was marketed as the pinnacle of masculinity, as if real strength came from being held hostage by your own facial hair. Essentially, everyone was out here presenting themselves as rugged gentlemen while living in fear of moisture, wind, and spontaneous sneezing. 6. In 18th century Japan, samurai followed a ritual for proper appearance that required shaving the top of the head completely bald while leaving the sides long enough to fashion into a ponytail, resulting in a hairstyle that suggested someone had lost a fight with a malfunctioning lawnmower. Yet this was considered the epitome of discipline and elegance, so strict that warriors risked shame and ridicule if they failed to maintain the perfect shiny scalp. Some would even heat metal tools to flatten stray hairs, creating a grooming routine that blended martial honor with low-grade self-inflicted burns. And the whole practice was treated with such seriousness that being seen with slightly grown-out stubble was practically a moral offense, proving that even deadly warriors can be undone by the tyranny of bizarre styling trends. 7. In ancient Rome, people believed that whitening their teeth with urine was the height of good grooming, which means there were citizens walking around convinced that the secret to looking proper was the aggressively gargling ammonia sourced from human donors, and imported Portuguese urine was considered especially premium, as if there were sommeliers grading the bouquet and acidity of bottled pee. The cultural logic insisted this ritual signaled refinement, even though the smell alone probably cleared the room, and wealthy Romans proudly showed off their glowing smiles while everyone else tried not to breathe too deeply. Because apparently historical beauty standards weren't complete until at least one person weaponized bodily fluids for cosmetic enhancement. 8. In the Middle Ages, nobles performed the ritual of table composure, a set of dining rules so absurdly complex that people spent most meals terrified of accidentally expressing joy, hunger, or human emotion. A person was expected to maintain perfect posture, touch food only with specific fingers, blow on nothing, slurp nothing, chew silently, swallow discreetly, and generally behave like an android testing its first firmware update, all while seated at a table serving questionable meat in questionable lighting. Breaking a rule wasn't just rude, it was socially catastrophic, with observers judging every micro-movement like medieval Olympic judges with too much time and too little serotonin, and the whole experience looked less like a meal and more like a hostage situation designed by Martha Stewart's evil twin. 9. In the Renaissance, men practiced a ritual called codpiece inflation, which is exactly as subtle as it sounds, where someone would stuff the front of their trousers with fabric, wool, or occasionally random household objects to produce a silhouette that suggested either virility or early-stage medical emergency, depending on the angle. Courtiers competed over whose codpiece appeared most impressive, treating the whole thing like a fashion arms race where the only battlefield was everyone's collective discomfort. And the funniest part is that these garments were often lavishly decorated with jewels, ribbons, and embroidery, meaning people were basically walking around with bedazzled billboards strapped to their pelvises in the name of dignity, proving that historical masculinity was often one decorative tassel away from complete farce. 10. In ancient Egypt, wealthy women followed a ritual of applying eyeliner thick enough to be visible from orbit, convinced that exaggerated almond-shaped eyes were the key to appearing noble, mystical, and vaguely threatening, even though the cosmetics were made from ingredients like lead, soot, and ground minerals that probably did more damage than all the curses in their mythology combined. Applying it required a level of hand stability normally reserved for bomb technicians, because one slip could mean burning, itching, or looking like you lost a fight with a charcoal briquette. Yet people swore by this ritual, not just for beauty, but for spiritual protection, proving that nothing boosts confidence like willingly smearing toxic sludge near your corneas in the hope of impressing the neighbors and mildly intimidating your enemies. 11. In the Victorian era, there was a ritual called the morning dress protocol, where women were expected to wear black for months or years depending on whether the deceased was a spouse, a parent, a distant relative, or someone whose name they barely remembered, and society treated this as a test of moral worth rather than a fashion choice. The rules dictated fabric type, shine level, accessory limitations, and even acceptable facial expressions, turning grief into a competitive performance where failing to look sufficiently funereal was considered scandalous. Some women were trapped in mourning dress cycles for so long they practically became background characters in their own wardrobes, all because the era decided emotional suffering wasn't real unless you also dressed like a haunted piano teacher. 12. In medieval monasteries, monks practiced a ritual of decorous silence, which meant they avoided speaking during meals and daily tasks, forcing them to communicate through an elaborate system of hand signals that made them look like medieval air traffic controllers guiding invisible aircraft. And they believed this strict nonverbal performance made them appear spiritually refined, even though the signals often led to confusion, misunderstandings, and accidental requests for things like extra fish or forgiveness from the wrong person. The whole system turned into a quiet pantomime where everyone pretended they understood the gestures while hoping no one misinterpreted a thumb twitch as heresy, proving that even in environments dedicated to peace, humans will invent new and creative ways to complicate absolutely everything. 13. In early modern Europe, powdered beauty patches, small adhesive shapes stuck to the face, became a ritual of sophistication, and people began placing stars, moons, hearts, and other tiny symbols across their cheeks as if their faces were personal billboards for cryptic emotional advertising. The trend got so competitive that certain patch placements carried coded messages about flirtation, availability, or political allegiance, meaning a single misapplied dot could accidentally announce you were in love with someone or plotting against the crown, and nobles spent hours each morning sticking these things on with the same intensity modern people reserve for assembling furniture with missing instructions. It was all considered essential to appearing proper, which is impressive considering everyone was essentially decorating themselves like festive pastries with trust issues. 14. In ancient Greece, athletes performed a ritual meant to project dignity and strength, competing entirely naked, coated in olive oil, while spectators looked on as if this were the most normal Thursday event imaginable. The oiling was considered essential for proper form, although it mostly made competitors resemble well-lubricated rotisserie chickens sprinting around a sandpit. After events, participants scraped the oil and sweat mixture from their bodies and sold it as a health product, because apparently nothing enhances your reputation like bottling your own post-workout residue and marketing it as medicine. And the entire system operated under the shared delusion that glistening nudity was the pinnacle of refinement rather than the world's earliest and most confusing athletic fashion statement. 15. In the 17th century, European aristocrats embraced an eyebrow ritual that involved shaving off their natural brows entirely and replacing them with fake ones glued on using mouse fur, giving them the expression of someone permanently surprised by how bad their life choices were. People insisted this looked refined even as they walked around with rodents' leftovers perched above their eyes, hoping the pieces wouldn't peel off mid-conversation or drift slightly out of alignment like confused caterpillars. Maintaining this look required constant vigilance, adhesive touch-ups, and an acceptance that your forehead now depended on vermin for aesthetic support, making it one of history's clearest reminders that fashion has never had the faintest idea what it's doing. 16. In the Byzantine Empire, a ritual for looking respectable involved wearing clothing dyed with Tyrian purple, a color so prestigious that obtaining it required harvesting thousands of tiny sea snails and squeezing them for pigment like stressed lemon wedges, making the dye worth more than some people's homes. Wearing it wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a political performance, since only elites were allowed to display the color without risking serious punishment, turning wardrobes into high-stakes legal minefields. People flaunted their snail-derived fabric like living status updates while pretending not to notice the faint marine aroma, and the whole system proved that societies will go to astonishing lengths to broadcast power, even if it requires mass shellfish casualties and a commitment to smelling faintly of tide pools. 17. In medieval Italy, men performed a ritual called walking the line, where they practiced strolling with exaggerated elegance, taking small, perfectly measured steps to demonstrate dignity and control, which made them look like they were perpetually tiptoeing across a floor covered in fragile eggs and social expectations. Manuals were written to teach the proper gait, complete with diagrams warning against steps that were too long, too quick, too confident, or too human, and failing to meet these standards meant being judged as uncultured or, worse, relaxed. The result was entire city squares filled with noblemen pacing around like malfunctioning fashion mannequins on wheels, all because society collectively agreed that the true mark of sophistication was moving through the world as if you were avoiding waking a sleeping dragon directly beneath your feet. 18. In the 19th century, some European ladies performed a ritual known as complexion veiling, which involved coating their faces in layers of rice powder so thick they essentially whitened themselves into freshly baked croissants, because appearing pale meant you weren't cursed with the horror of outdoor labor. The powder was so fragile that a stiff breeze could erase half their dignity in a single gust, and people still treated it like a beauty miracle, even though it clung to everything: gloves, furniture, unsuspecting pets, leaving ghostly residue wherever they went. One woman reportedly sneezed in public and created a mid-air dust cloud large enough to temporarily blind nearby onlookers. Yet everyone politely pretended nothing happened because acknowledging the absurdity of this ritual would have violated the era's strict code of silently approving whatever nonsense your peers insisted was proper. 19. In Tudor England, courtiers followed a ritual of greeting the monarch with an elaborate bow that required holding one's hat, bending the knee, lowering the head, and essentially folding the entire upper body like an anxious pocket knife, because nothing said respect like demonstrating how quickly you could collapse on command. The trick was to bow low enough to appear loyal without bowing so low that you toppled forward and slid across the polished floor like a human curling stone, something that definitely happened more than anyone admitted. One observer wrote that men practiced their bows in private chambers as if they were training for choreography in the world's least exciting ballet, convinced that the proper angle of their spinal curvature could make or break their political careers, proving that the best way to look noble was apparently to flirt with gravity at every formal greeting. 20. In ancient Persia, noblemen practiced a ritual of perfuming their beards so intensely that entering a room ahead of them was unnecessary. Their scent arrived first, introduced itself, and filled the space like a cologne-themed fog machine. Scented beard oil was considered a mark of refinement, which unfortunately encouraged some men to drown their facial hair in fragrances so potent that sitting next to them was equivalent to inhaling floral sabotage. Visitors occasionally complained of watery eyes, headaches, and temporary loss of smell, but everyone politely praised the aroma, because criticizing a nobleman's beard was a one-way ticket to social exile. The whole practice turned grooming into chemical warfare, proving that nothing says elegance like weaponizing aroma so aggressively that it could probably be used to fumigate vineyards. 21. In the Byzantine court, women adhered to a ritual requiring elaborate head coverings so tall and over-engineered they resembled early architectural prototypes, complete with towering frameworks of wire and fabric that made entering a doorway a test of precision engineering. Wearing these contraptions supposedly conveyed dignity and status, though watching someone attempt to sit, turn, or perform even minor neck movements demonstrated that dignity had clearly lost the fight to practicality. At formal events, attendants had to help women navigate hallways sideways like decorative crabs, ensuring their headpieces didn't topple like unstable Renaissance Jenga. Despite the obvious inconvenience, the trend persisted because apparently nothing communicated refinement better than proving you were rich enough to ignore ergonomics entirely. 22. In several medieval courts, nobles participated in the ritual of glove etiquette, where wearing gloves, holding gloves, removing gloves, kissing gloves, and presenting gloves became an entire unspoken language so convoluted it made Morse code look user-friendly. Removing one glove could signal friendship, removing both might imply flirtation, and dropping a glove could accidentally ignite a duel, meaning a simple fumble could escalate into accidental attempted murder territory within seconds. People treated gloves like emotional flashcards, carefully choreographing each movement to avoid miscommunication while simultaneously pretending this wasn't completely ridiculous. The whole system turned basic handwear into a high-stakes communication device, proving that aristocrats didn't need smartphones to ruin relationships. They managed perfectly well with leather accessories and too much free time. 23. In ancient India, some high-caste men followed a grooming ritual requiring their hair to be oiled daily until it gleamed like a polished obsidian sculpture, because shiny hair supposedly indicated spiritual balance and self-control. The problem was that the oil had a habit of transferring onto anything within a 3-foot radius: pillows, clothing, walls, unsuspecting servants, creating a slip hazard that could take out half a household with one mistimed lean. People accepted this mess as proof of status, even though running your hand through such a hairstyle was roughly equivalent to dipping it in a deep fryer. And the funniest part is that some texts describe men competing over whose hair shone brightest, turning the entire practice into a sort of spiritual wet-look pageant that somehow survived centuries without anyone asking why everyone's head looked like a lacquered dinner roll. 24. In Elizabethan England, having fashionable hands meant keeping them as pale and veiny as possible, which led to a ritual where women dusted their fingers with white lead powder and traced fake blue veins on their skin using delicate brushes, achieving an aesthetic best described as elegant medical emergency. The goal was to look delicate, fragile, and vaguely deceased, which society bizarrely interpreted as peak attractiveness. The irony, of course, was that the lead eventually made them sick, causing real pallor, real weakness, and occasionally real medical emergencies, turning their beauty ritual into the world's slowest and least glamorous self-sabotage. Yet everyone kept doing it because nothing communicates sophistication like intentionally painting yourself to resemble a fainting ghost auditioning for a plague reenactment. 25. In feudal Japan, noble women practiced a ritual of blackening their teeth with a lacquer-like dye called ohaguro, which created the effect of smiling with a mouth full of polished obsidian pebbles. This was considered the height of elegance, even though it made them look perpetually possessed to anyone not raised in the culture. Maintaining the effect required constant reapplication, ensuring the wearer spent half her time smelling faintly of iron and vinegar, all in the name of demonstrating loyalty, marital status, and social refinement. The bizarre part is how earnestly people defended the look, insisting that white teeth were barbaric and animalistic, proving once again that beauty standards are just societal dares that got wildly out of hand. 26. In medieval Germany, there existed a ritual called proper greeting beer, where visiting someone required accepting a cup of ale on entry, even if it was 9 in the morning, and refusing it was considered borderline hostile. This meant social gatherings often devolved into polite, half-drunken chaos before lunch, with guests stumbling through conversations they barely remembered, all to maintain the illusion of hospitality. The funniest part is that households prided themselves on offering ale strong enough to wake the dead, which ensured half their guests immediately needed a nap or a new liver. And despite the obvious impracticality of serving heavy alcohol to every passerby, the custom endured because nothing said proper manners like ruining everyone's productivity before noon. 27. In ancient Rome, virtuous women followed a ritual of wearing stola garments that were so long and layered they could trip over them simply by changing their mind too quickly. Yet society insisted these billowing fabrics symbolized dignity and restraint. Walking anywhere required either superhuman balance or a supportive entourage ready to catch you before gravity made a mockery of your social status. Some women reportedly mastered a specific gliding walk that minimized fabric collisions, turning mobility into a slow-motion performance art. Despite the logistical nightmare, the stola remained a symbol of respectability, proving that historical fashion could transform something as simple as walking into an Olympic sport performed for the approval of strangers. 28. In the Middle Ages, people believed that smelling pleasant was suspiciously sinful, so they performed a ritual of carrying pungent herbal sachets meant to purify the air, which in practice meant everyone walked around smelling like aggressively seasoned soup. The pouches were stuffed with rosemary, sage, mint, lavender, and sometimes garlic, which probably overwhelmed any nearby illness by making it flee in self-defense. Wearing one was considered a civic duty, even though the combined stench of a crowded market must have resembled a medieval spice explosion. And because the herbs were meant to signal virtue, people competed over whose sachet emitted the strongest aroma, turning hygiene into an olfactory arms race. Nobody actually won. 29. In 18th century France, men practiced a ritual called elegant posture training, where they balanced small books on their heads to cultivate a perfectly upright stance, because nothing destroyed your reputation faster than appearing relaxed. Gentlemen spent hours walking around their estates like malfunctioning marionettes, terrified of dropping a book and thus proving they had the posture of a mortal peasant. Some even expanded the training by balancing multiple books or switching to smaller volumes to show off their advanced spine discipline. Observers praised the resulting stiffness as a sign of refinement, even though the men looked like they were perpetually preparing for an X-ray. 30. In ancient Egypt, wealthy people wore elaborate scented cones on their heads. Yes, actual wax cones that slowly melted throughout the evening, releasing fragrances designed to announce wealth and sophistication while simultaneously dripping warm goo down their hair and clothing. The idea was that smelling luxurious outweighed the discomfort of hosting a small, aromatic candle meltdown on your skull. Guests pretended not to notice the slow-motion wax disaster happening around them, treating it as perfectly normal for social gatherings. The entire ritual demonstrates that humans will endure almost anything, including head-based wax erosion. If someone convinces them, it signals class. 31. In medieval England, nobles embraced the ritual of falconry not just as a hobby, but as a fashion statement, strolling around with hawks perched on their arms like feathery luxury handbags. The birds served as status symbols, even when they shrieked, defecated, or attempted unauthorized rodent hunts mid-conversation. Some nobles brought falcons indoors during social events, proving that nothing enhanced polite discussion like a giant bird staring down guests with predator-level intensity. Maintaining this ritual required training, feeding, and surviving occasional Talon misunderstandings, yet people adored it because nothing communicated refinement like willingly accessorizing with a creature capable of clawing your face at any moment. 32. In Renaissance Italy, certain elites practiced a ritual known as controlled blushing, attempting to appear modest and bashful by strategically rubbing their cheeks with beet juice or red-tinted powders that mimicked the glowing embarrassment of someone caught stealing pastries. This became a fashionable signal of innocence and purity, which is ironic when you consider the most experienced social manipulators were often the ones applying the reddest cheeks. The problem was that sweat, heat, or poor timing could cause the pigment to streak, leaving the wearer looking less modest beauty and more accidental clown festival. Yet people embraced the risk, convinced that simulated shyness was a crucial part of social success. 33. In ancient China, scholars practiced a ritual of growing excessively long fingernails to show they never performed manual labor, a status symbol that quickly devolved into a practical disaster. Once the nails reached several inches, daily tasks like eating, writing, or existing became Herculean challenges requiring servants, specialized tools, and constant vigilance to avoid snagging the nails on reality itself. Some scholars encased their nails in decorative sleeves to protect them, turning their hands into fragile museum exhibits. Despite the inconvenience, long nails remained a badge of honor, proving that nothing advertises intellectual superiority like being physically incapable of buttoning your own shirt. 34. In medieval Spain, noblewomen performed a ritual of wearing hoop skirts so wide they could barely pass through doorways without turning sideways like nervous crabs. Yet, society insisted this silhouette signaled grace and prestige. Maneuvering through crowded rooms resembled a slow-motion traffic jam caused by portable architecture, and sitting required strategic calculations normally reserved for military engineering. Skirts occasionally collided, resulting in accidental social fender benders that everyone pretended weren't hilarious. Still, the trend endured because the silhouette was considered irresistibly elegant, proving that fashion has never hesitated to turn human movement into an obstacle course in the name of propriety. 35. In 17th century France, elite women embraced a ritual called strategic fainting, which meant collapsing dramatically at social events to signal delicacy, refinement, and apparently a lifelong feud with oxygen. They carried special fans for the sole purpose of reviving themselves from their own theatrically induced swoons, often triggered by something as dangerous as a compliment, a warm room, or the horrifying realization that someone else's dress had more ribbons. Husbands were expected to catch these collapses like romantic goalkeepers, even though half the time the fainting spells were so exaggerated you could practically hear the internal countdown. 3, 2, 1, graceful timber. The funniest part is that everyone pretended this was normal, nodding solemnly while a grown woman lay on the floor performing the social equivalent of a Windows shutdown. 36. In medieval China, aristocrats practiced a ritual of wearing sleeves so long they dragged across the floor like silky, impractical snowplows, because apparently nothing communicated refinement better than garments designed to sabotage their own owner. People used these elongated sleeves for everything from hiding facial expressions to casually sweeping objects off tables. They didn't like turning clothing into a multi-tool that doubled as an emotional privacy screen. Trying to eat, write, or do literally anything required servants to wrangle the fabric like stagehands, managing misbehaving curtains. And everyone acted as though this was the pinnacle of elegance, rather than a textile hazard that could, and frequently did, take down entire displays of porcelain with one enthusiastic turn. It's a miracle anyone survived dinner. 37. In 18th century Austria, high society treated powdered beauty spots like competitive messaging stickers. But the aristocratic men didn't want to be left out, so they invented their own ritual, attaching small silk patches to their clothing to signal political allegiance, flirtatious intent, or personal grievances, essentially turning jackets into early prototypes of chaotic text threads. Forgetting which patch meant what was a diplomatic nightmare waiting to happen, and one misplaced symbol could accidentally announce you were available, angry, or preparing for a duel before dessert. Yet everyone insisted this silent patch language was sophisticated, even though it functioned with the same stability as a dropped Scrabble bag, proving once again that humans will gamify anything, including their own social implosion. 38. In medieval Islamic courts, scholars followed a ritual of applying perfume so obsessively that some were rumored to own over 100 different scents, layering them to create personal aromatic signatures, which sounds classy until you remember they were basically fumigating themselves into mobile potpourri grenades. Walking through a hallway meant leaving behind an olfactory trail so intense that other scholars could identify someone by scent alone, like an academic bloodhound exercise. Some mixtures were so strong that visitors reportedly felt lightheaded, though everyone blamed it on intellectual awe rather than inhaling an airborne flower garden at maximum concentration. Still, being recognized by smell before speech was considered a sign of prestige, proving history never met a fragrance it couldn't immediately weaponize. 39. In Renaissance Venice, nobles participated in a ritual of publicly parading on specially built shoe platforms called zoppe, which could reach over 20 inches tall, turning sidewalks into a fashion tightrope and every canal into a death trap. These stilts were meant to protect expensive dresses from mud, but quickly became status symbols. So naturally, they kept getting taller until women needed servants on each side to prevent catastrophic swan dives into the street. One wrong pebble and a noblewoman could topple like a collapsing building in slow motion. Yet society applauded the look, because nothing says elegance like turning basic locomotion into an extreme sport. Even better, some women layered multiple platform heights to create custom altitude levels, just in case gravity needed additional encouragement to file a complaint. 40. In ancient Japan, aristocratic women practiced a ritual of plucking their natural eyebrows completely off and then painting new ones halfway up their foreheads, creating a facial expression best described as permanently startled by reality. These floating eyebrows became symbols of poise, even though they made everyone look like they had just been told extremely surprising news about their taxes. Applying the painted brows required precision and a steady hand, because one uneven stroke could transform dignity into unintentional slapstick, and the entire look had to be reapplied regularly like a delicate theatrical prop. Still, people insisted the style communicated virtue, which is impressive, considering it mostly communicated that your real eyebrows had been evicted to make room for artistic interpretation. 41. In Victorian America, brides followed a ritual of preserving their wedding bouquets by hanging them upside down and sealing them in shadow boxes as reminders of marital purity. But some women went further and preserved every floral piece of the ceremony, transforming their homes into botanical museums of withering vegetation. Guests would politely admire what was essentially a curated collection of dehydrated plant corpses, pretending not to notice the faint smell of dried nostalgia lingering in the air. The ritual became so elaborate that magazines published tips on arranging lifelong floral exhibits, essentially encouraging couples to immortalize their wedding by turning part of their house into a romantic herbarium of decaying sentiment. Apparently, nothing says eternal love like hanging dead plants around your living room like sentimental taxidermy. 42. In ancient Greece, men participated in a ritual of grooming their beards into elaborate shapes using oils, combs, and occasionally heated irons. Yes, beard ironing. Because appearing proper required facial hair so mathematically sculpted, it would impress a geometry professor. The more dramatic the shape, the more respectable the man, leading to trends where entire symposiums were filled with philosophers stroking beards so rigid and glossy they could probably have deflected minor weaponry. Of course, maintaining these looks meant risking burns, tangles, and the constant fear of humidity, which was treated like a natural disaster. Still, men embraced the ritual wholeheartedly, proving that when it comes to vanity, history didn't save all its foolishness for wigs and eyebrows. It distributed it evenly across every available hair follicle. 43. In medieval Persia, elites practiced a ritual where the height of one's turban signified status, eventually leading people to construct towering fabric spirals so large that entering a building required geometry, teamwork, and sometimes disassembly. Some turbans were so massive they functioned as portable shade structures or emergency pillows, though no one admitted this because the official narrative was dignity, not practicality. Servants had to help wrap these monstrous headpieces, turning morning grooming into a textile engineering seminar. The best part is that people still judged one another harshly if the turban looked slightly uneven, even though the real miracle was that anyone could hold their head upright under the sheer weight of fabric ambition strapped to their skull. 44. In ancient Maya society, looking proper meant deliberately crossing your eyes, a ritual parents encouraged by dangling objects near infants' noses until their gaze permanently shifted inward, creating an aesthetic valued as noble and spiritually attuned. Walking around with crossed eyes wasn't considered odd. It was aspirational, a mark of status and beauty that made you appear connected to the divine. This meant generations grew up squinting like they were trying to read the fine print of the universe, while everyone else nodded approvingly. The logic behind the trend remains debatable, but it's clear the Maya committed to it with full cultural confidence, proving once again that every society has beauty standards that future generations will study and politely try not to laugh at. 45. In late medieval Europe, proper weeping became a ritual at funerals, so people hired professional mourners. Yes, emotional stunt doubles, who showed up, wailed dramatically, and collapsed artfully to signal that the deceased was truly cherished. Families competed over who could hire the most convincing cry squad, turning grief into a performative sport, complete with volume, duration, and theatrical flair. Some mourners even carried onions or secret irritants to boost tear production, basically using emotional cheat codes to outsob their rivals. The irony is that while mourners were paid to display dramatic sorrow, actual relatives were expected to maintain composure, creating a bizarre emotional outsourcing system where grief was considered too important to entrust to amateurs. 46. In the 18th century, European nobles embraced beauty patches to such an extreme that some people covered half their faces with velvet shapes, transforming themselves into walking scrapbooks. While earlier patches were dainty stars or dots, this new ritual escalated into crescents, hearts, and even miniature silhouettes, each with coded social messages, turning aristocratic gatherings into interpretive puzzles. Conversations often paused while someone mentally translated the patch constellation on their neighbor's cheek, hoping not to misread a romantic overture as political dissent. Maintaining this look required constant mirror checks because if a patch fell off mid-event, it could cause a scandal, a misunderstanding, or an unplanned engagement, depending on who saw it land where. 47. In Edo period Japan, courtesans practiced a ritual of wearing several layers of silk kimonos, sometimes upwards of a dozen, because elegance was measured by how many layers you could lug around without passing out. The combined weight could exceed 40 pounds, meaning walking became a slow-motion endurance challenge, and stairs became sworn enemies. Attendants had to help manage the layers so the wearer didn't accidentally cocoon herself like an extremely fancy butterfly. Yet despite the heat, weight, and risk of fabric avalanches, the look was celebrated as the pinnacle of beauty, proving that fashion has always been a collaborative battle between humans and textiles, with humans losing more often than they'd like to admit. 48. In 17th century England, nobles participated in the ritual of pale dining, avoiding foods like carrots or berries during important events because eating anything colorful might stain their lips or tongues and ruin the illusion of permanent ethereal delicacy. Entire banquets were filled with beige foods chosen solely for their ability to keep diners looking ghostly and unimpressed. People politely ignored the fact that these meals tasted like disappointment, seasoned with more disappointment, insisting that the aesthetic payoff justified the flavor apocalypse, and anyone caught with even a hint of color on their mouth faced social suspicion, as if they'd committed some forbidden act of culinary enthusiasm. 49. In ancient Rome, some wealthy families performed a ritual called ancestral mask maintenance, where they kept wax masks of dead relatives and polished them regularly to display at ceremonies, ensuring that guests were always greeted by a gallery of impeccably groomed ancestors silently judging everyone. These masks weren't subtle. They stared at visitors with the expression of people who desperately wanted to comment on the declining state of society. Maintaining them required labor, care, and the emotional resilience to dust your great-great-uncle's face weekly without questioning your life choices. Yet the ritual endured because nothing said family honor like surrounding yourself with the waxen faces of the deceased, like a very stern museum exhibition. 50. In medieval France, nobles believed that having a perfectly sculpted calf was a marker of status. Yes, calf muscles. So men displayed their legs in tight silk stockings and sometimes even padded the calves for extra volume, essentially creating early fitness fraud. Some nobles hired tailors specifically to engineer the illusion of peak leg day, while others practiced elaborate walking techniques to flex their calves at optimal angles, turning hallways into personal runways of lower leg theatrics. Women were expected to admire these calves with appropriate enthusiasm, pretending not to notice when a man's padded insert slipped or shifted, revealing that his aristocratic limbs were less Greek statue and more fabric-based invention held together by pride. 51. And finally, medieval Europe reached peak ritual absurdity with the ceremony of the royal groom of the stool, a prestigious court position awarded to the aristocrat, whose sacred duty was assisting the king during bathroom breaks, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally, because apparently the highest honor imaginable was managing royal bodily logistics. Being chosen meant you had unparalleled access to the monarch and consequently immense political influence, all thanks to a job description that reads like a punishment invented during a bad team-building retreat. Courtiers actually competed for this role, bragged about it, and treated it as the ultimate mark of refinement, proving once and for all that in the grand history of humans doing unhinged things to look proper, nothing, and I mean nothing, beats centuries of powerful men fighting over who got to supervise the king's toilet time. History clearly peaked at nonsense, and we just toured the greatest hits. Drop your vote for the dumbest ritual below, and subscribe if you're brave enough for the next round.